That's what we are aiming for, to have livable islands, and to do so through architecture, landscaping, urbanism. So on the next panel we'll be speaking about it. We'll have now a number of experts, if not the best at what they do. Okay, now we'll start with this panel. I will be presenting them very briefly. So this panel is called The Landscape of Sustainability and the Sustainability of our Landscape. We wanted to invite these experts and think together about the resources we have, the structures we have, and how landscape is a strategic factor in the Canary Islands, policies and actions of that sustainable management of the territory, also the protection of diversity, biodiversity and ecological resilience for a balanced socio-environmental development on islands. So here we have Juan Palop Casado. He's the founder and director of LAPA Studio, a architecture buffet as well as urbanism. He studied in Harvard University as an architect and participated there. He has a master's degree in design studies from Harvard University. He was part of the research team of the Harvard project in the city. He's a certified consultant as part of the panel of experts in sustainability assessment, PREAM, in addition to being a member of the International Association of Biourbanism. He is personally also deeply interested in the Mediterranean and southern parts, also on desert landscapes, and of course also the Canary Islands and other island groups. He has worked on many very important articles, and he is also a co-founder of a charity. He co-founded Instituto 20 Grados, a non-profit organization with the purpose of developing, in parallel with his professional practice, a reflective and innovative approach to sustainability and urban development in the subtropical south. His work has been recognized internationally and also, of course, in the Canary Islands. Thank you so much for being here. We also have here with us today Juan Manuel Palerm Salazar. He is the Professor of Architectural Projects at the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. He's also the President of UNISCAPE, European Network of Universities for the Study and Research of Landscape, the director of the second and third biennial of Architecture, Art and Landscape of the Canary Islands, as well as the Landscape Observatory of the Canary Islands. He's the founder and director of the Architecture Studio Parliament Tavares and Our Architects. He's been the director of the research group of the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, but he's also been involved with other universities like the one in Milan and at the Piacenza, amongst others. He's currently the president of the Committee of Experts for the Strategic Study of the Landscape of the Canary Islands and the promotion of the European Landscape Convention, created and attached to the presidency of the Government of the Canary Islands as a support and advisory body for the president, with the work on rebuilding or heritage and CICOP, which can be found here at La Laguna. We also have here today with us Noemi Tejera Mujica, urban architect, working with ANCA Architecture. She is an architect by the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. His studies included stays in London, Los Angeles and Milan. She has completed a PhD in architectural restoration, rehabilitation, research, trends and innovations, and a master in artistic and architectural heritage management, museums and art market. She's currently attached to the Atlantic Island Doctorate Program, History, Heritage, Institutional Legal Framework. And she's, of course, committed to gender studies and architecture. She is also the founder of Marca Púrpura. Her professional commitment to gender studies is complemented by her activity as a co-founder of this very organization, the Association of Canary Women Architects. She regularly participates in discussions, forums and specialized publications that focus on architecture, design, urban planning and gender, amongst other areas of studies. She is also professionally linked to Casariego Guerra Studio from 2007 until its refoundation, where it addresses an associate projects of different scales with an emphasis on public space and the regeneration of the city. So we can see that we have maybe not 3 generations, but here we can find a perfect round table of different perspectives, different points in time. So I would like to now and give the floor to you. But before that, I know that from your experience, we have these green corridors, this generative way of building. How can we incorporate recycling in construction? How can we think about autonomy and energy while building and self-sufficient landscapes? Sustainable mobility, community participation, and governance. We've talked about governance a lot. So how does that work with this specialization? I would like to now hand the floor to all of you, and later on we might have some time for questions from the audience.
Well, first of all, thank you to the Government of the Canary Islands and the University of La Laguna for organising this event and inviting us all to participate. Thank you to Carlos and Carmelo and their teams for the organisation of this event. I know it hasn't been easy. I'm going to begin my intervention with my conclusion. So, landscape of sustainability, sustainability of landscape. I find this very interesting because I've been working for a long time in the landscape of sustainability. What this describes is a traditional view to landscape, changing this traditional view and looking at landscape through a sustainability lens, or perhaps even with your eyes totally closed. We've been talking about sustainability all afternoon, but the first thing we have to do is define it. First, you can see the classic economy. So, these are conventional economies. Everything depends on the economy. The economy is what determines all of the subsystems. We here at this table, everyone in this room has worked up to now to the service of this economy. The bioeconomy, sustainable economy rather, requires this system to be turned around. Society, environment, energy and material then are the important factors. It would require our clients to be bio-clients, bio-politicians, bio-teachers, But until this is possible, we need to keep working to make our social, environmental, energy systems work better than the traditional economic systems. So, in our profession, we shouldn't necessarily turn around these systems, but we rather have to create circular systems to create a landscape for nature, harnessing living dynamics, the life inside it. These are images of decentralized systems. This is very typical of industrialized societies where there is a center that solves all problems. This is something we need to change. We don't want one source of energy to supply all of our needs without understanding it. Rather, we want something more akin to the second and third images, a distribution system. This requires a whole set of new organization techniques. We also need to define the word ecology. This isn't just nature, but it's the connection between how we use that ecology and the ecology itself. This is a project from the Biosphere Reserve. This is a perfect customer. You want your customers to all be biosphere reserves. I'll just go briefly through these slides, but here we have two different ways of relating to nature. On the right, you are represented by this image, educated people who deny nature, try to dominate it, and create collapse. I'm also a part of this system. The educated people are what are producing this. And then on the left-hand side, we have an image which is the product of the uneducated population, yet nevertheless they have been able to create a culture in this landscape. I don't want to talk necessarily about the project itself, but rather everything that's behind the project. Here we have another image. We can see that the only area that was free of flooding was the natural space in that image. Here we have spontaneous gardens that have been created by these people that see these possibilities, that bring them to life. And this is an example of a butterfly garden. Here we have a war zone. A war with nature, a war with the water is what's being fought there. It's an arid area that floods twice a year. Here we have this rain runoff water, which has defined the urban planning of Arrecife, the city of Arrecife. This is the plan of a city that tries to capture rainwater runoff. You can see a system here that is trying to utilize these natural resources. So this is a landscape that has an infrastructure that organizes it. Here in the Canary Islands and in the rest of the world, this is how we use water. Imagine a drop of water falls next to a flower here in La Laguna. What we do is put that drop of water into a tube. We take it to the coast. Before we discharge it into the sea, we don't filter it and treat it. That's a lie. We just discharge it directly into the sea. In this journey, it's absorbed 50% of the microplastics that it will go on to absorb. But to use this water for agriculture in La Laguna, we'll have to take it out of the sea, take the salt out of it, pump it using electricity through a big grey tube, which is hugely expensive, and we end up watering our flower using the same drop of water that fell next to it the day earlier. So what we need to do really is manage the water where it falls and not send it into this expensive and absurd circuit that uses electricity and resources. And this is something we can explain easily to people. People understand this system. And we've created a number of walking routes to show people where this water travels along, and to try to educate people about where they might be able to take the water and use it at source. So we're talking about storing water, producing energy, and creating spaces like these. These are public spaces that also function as infrastructure, and this is something that the local government struggles to understand. Is it a public space project or is it an infrastructure project? Well, it's both, actually. And this is the idea behind sustainable landscapes. Treating water exactly where it falls from the ground, from the sky. And when something is challenging, then you organize a seminar to help people to understand. Oftentimes, nature-based solutions are far simpler, actually, to explain than these water cycles that I described earlier. So we organised this session, this 2-day session with technicians. We brought the leader in Europe of sustainable drainage. We brought experts from Barcelona who explained how all of what we were proposing were possible. And at the end, somebody came up to me and said, "We're never going to give this project our approval." And what I learned from this experience was that it's not a problem of knowledge. The problem is accepting change. And I was saddened by this because I thought that after these 2 days we would solve this problem. Bringing these experts here, they would be able to explain that this was the cheaper and most efficient option, but ultimately I realized that the problem is our inability or lack of will to change. And this is one of the frontiers of sustainability. Apologies, my slides are in English, the speaker says. So what I'm trying to say is ecology is the new engineering. Working in landscape, urbanism, working on our cities, trying to recover the natural cycles, the dynamics of nature, its circularity. Right now, this is something we should all be working on. Thank you. Good afternoon. Lovely to meet you all. Thank you, Carmelo, Carlo. Thanks to the organisers for inviting me, and I'm really happy to be here. I've been able to catch up with old colleagues. Colleagues that I have very much enjoyed working with for many years, and we're still working together, struggling together. I think we need to unite our battle cries more than ever now. I very much enjoyed the first session, the 3 parts of the session. A number of important points were raised. And now it's time to talk about architecture, landscape. I will try to be brief. I've got 5 images to share with you this evening. I did have some more, but I've cut it down. I hope that what I say will complement well what my colleagues at the table are talking about. So, of course, this panel is entitled Landscape of Sustainability, Sustainability of Landscape. Is it sustainable to create projects? Not necessarily, but it's something we have to do. But we should do it in a sustainable way. Is it sustainable to make predictions, to plan, without ensuring that the plan is sustainable? If it's not, then it's a rubbish project. And so, sustainability perhaps is a social aspiration. Yes, without a doubt. But in terms of the specific work that we do, of course, this is something that affects us, but perhaps detrimentally. What ends up happening is that it regulates things that don't need regulating. So, we are over-regulated to the extent that we forget that all of our work should inherently be sustainable anyway. This is something that really bothers me, especially when I have to listen to criticisms on architectural products that are based on legal frameworks, which are usually copy and paste of versions of other projects that haven't even taken into account the sustainable benefits of that project. It might be the case that ignoring some of the parameters would make that project much more sustainable. And this is something that happens every day in government. Sometimes students or colleagues have gone to the other side to write those binding reports, and they end up falling into the same behaviours. And I don't know why this is happening. It makes absolutely no sense at all. So, on the one hand, we applaud all of these changes towards sustainability. Yet, all of the rules that are being placed upon urban planners and architects, etc., are always obstacles. They're stumbling blocks. They're making our lives more difficult. In the vast majority of cases, these rules, these requirements, are irrelevant when it comes to sustainability. And this is quite upsetting for me. I've worked on very difficult projects in the past. For instance, the Barranco de Santos, the ravine that passes through Santa Cruz. In Asturias, there is a similar geographic feature, but it's controlled with a very different mechanism. We used 3 different teams to try and determine the water basin of this ravine. We had to look at all of the water channels, their altitude, what had happened in these locations over the past 500 years. The project had 5 different phases. It was very complex, very expensive. The 5th stage was and is still pending for the past 10 years, and that is the reservoirs to capture this rainwater. And I don't know why it hasn't been finished, because we have the water channel in place. All that's missing is this last stage. So what we want is that when it rains, and we've seen in the past 15 years it's working. Between the 50s and 2003, there were always 1 or 2 deaths every year in heavy rains, but since then there have been no deaths. And there was also a great deal of material damage to homes and vehicles, etc. And places in the Canary Islands with similar problems have opted for this same technique to create these water channels to guide the water down to the ocean. So in the general plan, there were to be built 2 water channels measuring 16 meters wide to direct this rainwater. Part of the plan was to understand how important this ravine was to the overall landscape of Santa Cruz. So we had to leave the stone open to view so that people could see this infrastructure and keep an eye on the water level in the water channel to be able to avoid danger for the local population. And then the 5th stage was what to do with this water that the channel collects. So around the library, the TEA, they have a direct discharge point there because otherwise water would come in from the sea. But we still haven't finished this last stage of the project. This project, a similar project, should be carried out for all of the ravines across the island and in other islands. But it hasn't. And why? Because we use these ravines as places to park our cars. There is no cultural understanding that these ravines are an integral part of the habitat of our islands. They've been used as places to throw rubbish, to fly tip. It's where we lit the San Juan bonfires. It's a place that we would go and smoke a cigarette in secret. In the Canary Islands, there's an expression, alongarse, to be along. It doesn't exist in the rest of Spain, and it's used to describe all of these ravines because they have traditionally been places that people enjoy spending time. Because they can see the ravines in their entirety. Those in La Matanza have buildings that have been constructed along the edges of these ravines because the view is quite amazing. In Las Palmas, you see very similar things. So, local urban policies and island policies need to recognize that these ravines aren't just channels to protect people from water, but they're also a way to understand our territory and live in it. We don't want to live in the ravines, but rather understand them as a part of the structure. Most people just want to build over the top of them to be able to put a car park on top. In Las Palmas, there are some terrible projects. The Barranco de los Tilos is one such example. And these ravines in Gran Canaria have been absolutely key in establishing the main economies of the island throughout its history. Maybe the solution is to just accept these ravines as they are. I've also worked for many years in Venice. The control of the Mosse, these are platforms that basically control the water that enters the center of Venice in high tides. But already in the year 700, rather 1700, all of the rivers that led to the Venice Lagoon were redirected to other land sites. This was an amazing piece of engineering, and it created the biggest agricultural land expanse in the Veneto. This seems to me to have been a great success. What happens in Venice is that when the water level rises, it's not just water that goes in, it's silt that ends up creating permanent change to the underwater soil. So it needs to be accompanied by a sophisticated drainage system as well. Sustainability, though, is about keeping Venice alive. but sometimes tough decisions have to be made. Another example. This sentence reads, sustainability is not the same as sustainable. This came from a foreword for a book that I wrote on behalf of a fellow researcher. The idea is that sustainability, according to our dictionary, is a set of parameters to be applied. And it contrasts actually this term to sustainable, which describes a natural process that is in line with the building of that territory. So the territory itself is sustainable. So we have to understand that natural process to be able to build sustainably on it. So landscape isn't a pretty garden or allotment. I need to ensure that my work is in line with my way of life, with the public spaces that surround me. There are all kinds of dimensions to take into account when talking about this idea of landscape, according to its definition from Europe. I have another example, a more fun example. I hope you like it, and that is the orange tree patio outside the Cathedral of Seville. You know that these oranges are very pretty. We might eat them, but people in Seville don't eat these oranges. So why have they planted orange trees? It's strange, right? They don't eat them. There's no value added there. Well, actually there is some value. The problem is they need a lot of water. How does the water get there? Does someone walk around with a watering can? Does it rain very much in Seville? No. There is actually a whole system of water channels that were built there in that courtyard. The water comes from the river and it waters those orange trees in that courtyard and also all of the plants in the royal palace. So those orange trees are watered by a system, a very intricate system of very thin water channels that was designed a long time ago. And all of this was done in order for there to be the smell of orange blossom during the Easter celebrations. Was it worth all of that effort? Well, I think it was. It's not sustainable at all. But where is the sustainability? Michael's presentation talked about the spiritual, social dimension of things. And so making projects is about setting out a logic for the social understanding of a place. If this isn't taken into account, then it's just an administrative act that seeks a signature of an architect to be approved by the City Hall. But monitoring these projects in terms of their sustainability doesn't necessarily work. I wanted to give another example here, but I will skip ahead. This is Sitio Litre in Puerto de la Cruz. But this isn't the problem. The hotel's not the problem. The problem is also the non-tourist infrastructure there. Here we can see an image from 1964, where we can see the infrastructure from the sugarcane plantations, wine from the 1800s. We made the wine here that was used at the signing of the Declaration of Independence in the US. Then bananas and houses in the following images. Using these same terraces that were built and used by wine growers, by sugarcane growers. So, can we find sustainability here? No. We have to recognize that this is not good. We need to have this critical eye to understand that the future can't be determined by these mottos, but rather we need to discard these obsolete systems that we've used throughout history. We have to recognize we've learned nothing so far. The tools for territorial management haven't been changed in a very long time. Some adaptations have been made, yes, but there are always three factors there. Categorizations of soil uses, and a lot of these things haven't changed since the Spanish Civil War. So what I'm trying to say is we have a lot of work to do. We need to become more aware of the reasons why we are able to enjoy, for instance, the orange blossom during Holy Week. Thank you, Juan.
Perfecto. Bueno, buenas tardes a todos y a todas.
Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to thank the organizers, as my colleagues just did, to Carmelo, to Carlos, for having me here today within this experts panel. So I must say that both of them have been my teachers, so there is both are responsible for this. One as an urbanism teacher and the other one as a planning professor. So now I'd like to talk about common landscapes and care for these landscapes. I would first and foremost like to highlight the care taken to create this conference, to really formulate those big questions, but also the different parts of today's agenda, so thank you for that. Well, I will try to follow my paper so that you won't be getting more sleepy, and so I won't be wasting any time, so we can keep up to the schedule. So we have a landscape where we can see different crises, water scarcity, also financial crisis, as Juan said. We have made a tool out of this discipline, so it's not efficient anymore. It's more about rethinking the way we settle in places. We need to create a strategic planning in an innovative way that contrasts to the urbanism rules we have nowadays, the law on urbanism, which is completely outdated. So here we can see a picture of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, a city where the sea cannot be seen, as well as other green spaces. But I believe it really showcases what we want to share. This is a monument by Charles and Roy Eames, where they created a machine that does nothing at all. It absorbs the solar energy to move and move and move like a technical space with its own dictionary. Landscapes have a whole world within themselves, the history, the current affairs, and throughout these components, it creates a new identity. Landscape is also a vehicle of knowledge exchange, as Juanma said, with the ravines. To have a ravine island, it exchanges knowledge, values, and experiences from one generation to the next. The landscape is also part of the community that lives in it and reinterprets it with the pass of time. And nature of landscapes and its value is also deeply linked to its transformation possibilities. We all know Donella Meadows, physicist and environmental author who wrote about the limits of growth. And she taught us about the serious climate crisis that we're facing nowadays. The Earth is facing risks, and it's trying to strike a balance between the economic growth and a limited amount of resources. I would like to also highlight how the common good should be a part of governance while planning or land. It should strengthen both the public and the private sector. The first woman to win the prize in award for economy was Elinor Ostrom, with her Governing the Commons, the Evolution of Institutions for Collective Action. She studied many different cases, and her work showed that the possession of the common, self-managed, is better than the one that is privatized or centralized. It's of utmost importance to understand that we have to go from the compact to the broader understanding of this topic, of these settlements. We have to understand that country and city are not antagonists, but the country should be aiming to be like the city and vice versa. The different resources of the land, the social resources, and also the outskirts of the cities could not be defined by just square meters or figures. We need to protect these spaces. We need to do so with the law that make it a part of the natural and energy transition in order to have more sustainable spaces in cities. Well, landscape is not only our heritage, it's also food or air or water or refuge. We need to strengthen it, we need to protect it as in hybrid space. And that's absolutely key in order to redesign cities. It's needed within resilient processes which are becoming more and more urgent by the day. This is a picture from Manhattan. There we can see Agnes Dennis, where she explores the relationship between the city and the country, and we can see how she plants 2 hectares. To achieve to do that, a land that was priced at $4.5 billion is quite a statement. It represented food, energy, trade on an international global scale, and also from her ecofeminism. She has informed us about how we are interdependent beings. We need to work together to create worlds, but not worlds that want to grow without limits. That's a war against our own bodies. We have to work for independence within our bodies, but also within our worlds, while respecting the ecological systems that we can find within it. Usually, we look at these commons as fragmented, but territories, bodies, landscapes, memories, living and moving around, taking care of this cannot be treated in separate ways and isolated ways. We need to recognize our dependence and interdependence, not only with other beings on the planet, but also with all the other elements that are a part of the world. We are islands, and we've talked about it throughout today's conference. Landscape is a strategic component of our islands. We have a fragmented space, limited space with a great biodiversity. More than half of our territory is protected, and we have different environmental limits. Within the islands, we need to answer, as we have been hearing throughout the afternoon, to all these questions. We are suffering from vulnerability. We are fragile, our ecosystems are, and we also need to decarbonize. We are vulnerable to those processes, the quality of life, local control on production and distribution, food consumption, amongst many, many others. We are surpassing the natural limits of our natural borders. Here you can see translation, which is called seaweed on the surface of the water. Fina Millares in 1973 created this work. Translations, Heber, floatant on the sea. All natural and biological borders are usually ignored by all administrations, by all laws. We need to manage vulnerability through ecosystemic approaches. We need to manage the land through bioregions instead of administrative regions. The anthropic conception of territories and its administrative management does not take into account bioregions. Feminist urbanism, as opposed to patriarchal colonialistic approaches, shows how people should be at the center of urban decision-making tools. Feminist tools show how we can understand the different structures of our societies, to incorporate this cross-cutting, gender-based approach can shed some light on a model and on solutions that wouldn't be achieved otherwise. So here we can see also the understanding of the body. Here we can see value export, understanding the link between our bodies and our cities. We also have some historical guarantees. The urban supports of the cities have been used in many different ways through many different times in history. Usually we think about the cities with continuous landscapes where we have some spaces which are quite open. Now, common spaces, here we can see Jenny Holzer, is usually a complex idea, but is shown through quite a simple statement, through a unique point of view. Here we can see how you lift the surprise of sorts of all lands flew over the city. We need to support the quality of life of people, but also of all other living beings. We need to find a resilient, eco-responsible and connected approach. We need to work on this at a fast pace to include it within our collective agenda. However, as you've already noted, we won't be able to find some recipes on how to solve it. We won't have a single recipe, as every region is unique and needs their own set of recipes and studies, research. So we need to share some that will. We need to develop specific projects. And before I finish, I would like to share 3 projects. Not the whole projects, but a part of those projects. Don't get scared. So from the architectural school in 2022, we worked on the development of the Clear Skinny Water project together with Nomad Garden. There we rediscovered and rebuilt some of the cultural and biological parts of the ravine. 6.4 kilometers in more than 14 million years. That's the length, and the first thing is the length, and the second, its age. And we, with Arquitectura Arca, we also worked on rebuilding the football center with the Estadio Insular, and we tried to also contribute with some historical figures like the one built by Alfredo Farray in 1944. These public spaces are an expression of our communities, and here we can see some pictures of Santa Cruz de Tenerife on the Las Charcos beach in Valle Seco. It's a public space. We aspire to put people at the center of its redesign. We want to break with this standardization that separates wishes, bodies, and spaces. Recently, we received a mention Architecture Awards of 2024. These are public spaces where our link with nature has to be deeply strengthened, to work with these rewilding projects, to also create positive or good spaces for bees. I also want to highlight that through this landscaping strategy, we've also worked with this road that supports the port, and how we could also include this green space that usually can't be found or recreated within port spaces. In this case, we were able not only to regrow it, but also to create regenerative models. These are just some notes, strategies and approaches from a theoretical and practical sense that I believe as a professional and as an architect that might be helpful for these common spaces, for the common good. It's a titanic challenge, but we can find different solutions for it from the perspective of common resilience and also climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. We have been talking about bioeconomy, building a cultural landscape. We heard about the need to plan for sustainability as a social aspiration. We talked about how oftentimes we don't have adequate parameters for sustainability that ultimately mean that our projects aren't sustainable. Naomi talked about the importance of this dialogue, this eco-dependence, and also this very interesting feminist perspective. So lots of things to think about. Are there any questions, either from our speakers here or from the audience or our followers online? Let's perhaps begin with questions from the floor. I see you all sitting quietly. Does anyone have anything they would like to ask? If not, then we'll get started with one of my questions. Actually, it's a question from Miguel online. So the huge population increase here in the Canary Islands, our huge tourist numbers as well, are of course significant. He wants to know, is sustainable development even possible with this type of, this extent of population increase? Well, of course, the big problem here and I think everyone is aware about this. It's, of course, clear that overpopulation leads to conflict. So we can either deal with managing this conflict or not let more people in. and that's increasingly difficult. I mean, I'm talking about limiting visitor numbers here. Of course, this is not easy. Does tourism have limits? I'm not sure. I think some of you are more knowledgeable about this. I think tourism is having an increasing impact on the way we all behave. We're all tourists, ultimately. So what we need to do is manage the impact of this tourism. This is something that we need to be able to resolve. But what we can't resolve is that if this is linked to the fact, for instance, that Tenerife has a series of municipalities, but it doesn't have an island-level perspective in its planning. The island plan is just a hodgepodge of all of the different municipal plans. So I do believe that there are many places that are savable, that we are able to apply logical solutions, but what we can't have is in 3 municipalities have 3 industrial zones. We can't have municipalities that compete with each other for tourism. So we need to understand the whole island as being sustainable, not just the individual territories that make up that island. And we need large-scale quality programs to try to manage habitats. It's true that the north of Gran Canaria and Tenerife, in any case, are not being planned very elegantly, let's say. Well, on this question then, as to whether we fit or not, I'm not sure. Are there lots of us? Are there not that many of us? But what I do know is that the way that we plan and build territory, we won't be able to fit even the number of people that there are at the moment, let alone more people. So, and as I say, if I look at the island plans, the Canary Islands are expecting an increase in population from 2.2 million to 3 million. And I do think that in the Canary Islands we haven't taken very seriously these concepts like dense islands or mass tourism. What we need are very sophisticated management systems. In other words, one of my friends who is an expert in tourism said to me, Juan, I can teach a tourist how to open oysters, but to teach a whole kitchen team to cook a meal for 500 people, that requires sophisticated planning. So, well, I'm not sure if that answered the question or helped in any way. Well, just to add one more thing. I've been studying the capacity of the tourism sector here in the Canary Islands. I've been working with the regional government, and we haven't found any logic to the numbers and the parameters that have been applied when looking at capacity. We don't understand these parameters because they're quite contradictory, especially because of what you just mentioned. Well, Just to add one thing, thinking about how many tourists or people fit here is not really the right question. What we need to be asking is what the situation is right now, and this housing challenge, this demographic challenge is very complex. And then we can start to do things. It's true that we all agree that this is a complex issue. It's not easy to plan our cities. We need to regenerate our physical infrastructure, and these areas that could be built upon, we'll try to not build upon them. This peri-urban or rural culture needs to be protected. These is to do with water, to do with food. We need to find balance. How can we plan things so that we all have enough space, we all have clean air to breathe? And the only way to guarantee all of these things is to reinforce these community spaces, these open spaces, before we do anything else. Well, along the same lines, perhaps we should consider participatory processes, collaborations. Perhaps these are things that could add something to this processes. Well, I'm not an expert in participation, but, and yes, we talked about legal frameworks earlier. Participation is inherent in any transformative process, but not participation for participation's sake, but rather this collaboration at every stage of projects. We need to work from the bottom up to ensure that any agreements that are made are a result of the whole project process. So, of course, participation is an inherent part of these processes in order to ensure their success. Anything else? One last question, perhaps? Or we can bring the session to a close. One last question. We were talking about this saturated territory. Can this change? Are there any case studies around the world that could serve as inspiration? Is it possible to plan our urban spaces with sustainable criteria, especially when it comes to tourism? What do you think? Well, the question has something implicit in it which I don't like, and that is to do something we need to be able to fit in the space itself. But I think that's not really the right question. The question is, can we build processes, for instance, looking at distance from your workplace, the way that energy is accessed, how water is recycled in the same building, how waste can be turned into resources in order to reduce consumption. I think there are so many things that can be done. But it's not a question of do we fit? Does it fit? So that's a very sort of objectifying the discipline. Spaces can be organised in many different ways and at many different scales. Well, in urban planning law in Spain, free spaces are codified, so they're not free spaces really. It should be around 5 square meters per citizen. The maximum it's reached is 20 meters per inhabitant. That's the maximum. And the general plan in Las Palmas, I think, has reached around 21, 22 meters squared. But these are spaces, for instance, to take your dog for a walk or to take your child to the park. I'm not comparing a dog and a child, but places where you can go for a walk. But there's not a space that's conceived as a free, open space linked to, for instance, a forest, which might be something that exists in Berlin, for example. In Berlin, all of the main train stations that have not been used since World War II have been turned into parks. This was where all of the ecologists went to smoke their cigarettes and spend their free time, and so they've campaigned for them to be turned into parks. So it's an interesting history there. Today, tourist spaces aren't working because it's based on plots that aren't regenerative, that don't have any way of being self-sufficient in terms of their energy. We need 2,000 meters squared per hotel complex in order for it to be self-sufficient in terms of water and energy. It's very expensive otherwise to comply with all of these sustainability parameters. In Gran Canaria, in any case, there is an unwillingness to do things this way. There is a fear of not being able to do it correctly. There's a lack of tools that are adequate. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you. Well, perhaps now is the moment to bring the session to a close. As we've heard, it's not just about whether or not we fit in this territory. We need to be self-sufficient in terms of materials, energy, water, changes in paradigm that will lead to extensive legislative change as well. Thank you very much to all of you, and I encourage you to continue working on these issues. The Canary Islands are islands to be lived in, islands to be transformed. We will see you all tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. To those of you following us online, thank you very much.